If you were a factory worker, picture this. Picture this for me.
All right.
It's the early 1900s slash like late 1800s. You're a child. You're a factory worker. What do you think? I veer back and forth. What do you think would be the best, like, disease to get as a young child factory
Disease to
worker?
get. I thought you were gonna ask what the best job to get would be.
Well, okay, actually, that's a better question. What's the best job you could get as a young child factory worker in the 1900s?
I think textile work probably has the lowest harm risk. I think it would have to be textile. I mean, like you had cotton mills, which were horribly prone to fires, but as a general rule, you weren't inhaling dangerous chemicals on a regular basis.
Yeah, there's a lot where you're inhaling dangerous chemicals or touching dangerous chemicals or being exposed to lead. No, pretty much every sense. They were like the five senses. Every sense, there was some job that was like, fuck these kids.
Right.
And that brings us to today. Welcome to the Dark Archive. I'm Gavin.
And I'm Julia.
And today we're going to be talking about what I like to call killer workplaces. Literally. Sans literally. I knew that a lot of like these old factories and places were dangerous. But when you look into them, oh boy. They did not care about safety in the slightest.
Oh, no, not even a little bit.
No.
The problem with industrialization was that once labor became the most expensive part of the process, you found ways to bring that cost down.
Yeah, and this was well before baby boomers. So it's not even like they
yeah.
But I say that in terms of like, it's not like they were like, oh, we've got so many kids, let's put them to work. This
You
might
did
have,
have a lot of kids.
I guess, because I guess it was like the day and age where it was like people working on a farm, and it's like you have all these kids to work on the farm, and then you have kids, and then you send you don't send all the kids to go work in factories. Some of them had to be in school.
Not necessarily. I'm sure there's a whole detailed field of study on what kind of kids are being sent into factories, but factories are an industrial complex. You don't get farm kids in factories.
No, yeah.
It's entirely a city-based economy.
Well, yeah, I'm saying like the farm is like a separate thing. That's like farmers being like, we gotta have a dozen kids so they can all tend to the farm. It's like that, but in cities.
Well, urban density in terms of how it relates to class structure and distribution is interesting. I mean, it's not an uncommon complex or an uncommon dynamic for people in poverty or just in poor socioeconomic fields to have a lot of kids. So there was a lot of fodder for these factories, and there were no child labor laws. So why would you have a kid sitting around when you could be sending them to earn a wage?
Yeah. Plus, it's not like kids were distracted by like iPads and like get like Xboxes and stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess what else did they have to do but get occupational diseases from working in these places? You want to know here? You want to know an occupational diseases?
Tell me, Gavin.
If you couldn't infer from the two words that make up the phrase, an occupational disease or industrial disease is any chronic ailment that occurs as a result of work or occupational activity. No duh. An occupational disease is typically identified when it is shown that it is more prevalent in a given body of workers than in the general population or in other worker populations. The first such disease to be recognized, squamous cell carcinoma of the scrotum, was identified in chimney sweep boys by Sir Percival Pott in 1775. Chimney sweeps had a lot more issues than squamous cell carcinoma, I'm sure, because you're breathing in stuff, you're touching all this stuff.
Got it.
Yeah, they're breathing in things, they're touching dirty things. Kids are probably getting trapped and dying in like old chimneys, I would guess. I don't know. I haven't seen Mary Poppins recently. I think that was from the extended cut, but not a safe job, especially I'm sure in 1775.
As I remember, kids were especially coveted for those jobs because they were small.
Yeah.
It's another reason I worked in mines, small bodies.
Yeah. Which we'll get to miners. We'll get the little boy miners. But yeah.
It was on the band name.
I think probably for a lot of jobs, yeah, not even just chimney sweeps and mines, a lot of
Haha,
it.
little boy miners. It's a pun. Sorry.
No, yeah,
Continue.
minor like minor, but also minor. There's
It's
two
not funny
spellings.
when you explain it, Gavin.
I know. I'm sure kids in general were coveted for a lot of jobs, obviously, especially before so many of these little intricate jobs could be done by like machines because they were
Mhm.
small, or like women, if they're like, oh, women have tiny little hands. They can draw on, do little on little watches and paint on little watches.
The interesting thing is that this isn't a new system of manufacturing or labor organization to the late 19th, early 20th century. That's when we most strongly associate it with. You've got factory style systems of labor and just general abuse and manipulation of poorer or underrepresented populations dating back forever. Lace making, for example, which came about in the 17th century, was primarily done by young women, young girls. It would be done. It was made a lot in orphanages. So all these disenfranchised populations, often young or otherwise neglected by society, were taken advantage of to do free labor. These women were not compensated for these things. So this system is not unique to this time and place.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a new, like most of the things that we talk about, they're not new concepts. Satanic Panic wasn't a new concept. It was well around before the 80s. They burned witches, and people being treated poorly at their jobs is not a new concept and is still currently not a foreign concept. Granted, now there's not as much radioactive material that workers have to deal with on a daily basis, thankfully. But even back in this time of industrialization, specifically more so the period that we're talking about, there were a lot of different types of occupational diseases, especially when you break them down. So some well-known occupational diseases include lung diseases, like what we said with the chimney sweeps, which also includes asbestos among asbestos miners and those who work with asbestos installation, as well as black lung, coal makers, pneumoconiosis among coal miners, which we also already slightly mentioned, and again with chimney sweeps, people inhaling stuff. Also, a lot of, even to today, construction workers. My dad's an architect, and I've gone to job sites with him, and he's seen different insulation that is still like, ooh, this is probably full of asbestos. So we need to like get somebody to take care of this. So even that, I mean, granted, now there's safety precautions and masks and things. But I'm sure when the people were installing the things that are now currently poisonous, was also probably not under the best conditions. As well as silicosis among miners and quarrying and tunnel operators, and bisonosis among workers in parts of the cotton and textile industry. So this whole category of lung diseases, obviously, if you just boil it down, is people inhaling stuff that they shouldn't. And then it, gets into their lungs and then into their bloodstream.
I stand corrected about the whole cotton mill thing. You are inhaling nasty shit.
Yeah. I'm sure in most, I can't even say this because I wasn't around in the 1920s and time of industrialization even before.
No.
Shocking. I use a lot of moisturizer. I'm sure there's even more industries where, and when there's so many industries today where you breathe in things and like people still deal with it's this also. Most of these are not, none of this is solved. There's just now safety equipment and laws. There's also different skin diseases and conditions caused by chemicals and having wet hands for long periods of time while at work. Eczema.
Ooh, trench foot.
What's trench
your
foot?
hands. Trench foot. That's from the First World War, when a lot of the front was done in these trenches, which would fill with water because they were ditches. And you'd have soldiers in wet shoes and boots for extended periods of time. And when you overexpose your skin to moisture like that, without periods to dry off in between, your skin starts to slough off. Like it literally just decomposes right off of you. Just
That is
like a sock.
disgusting.
Yes, it's nasty.
So yeah, that is a fantastic example. And even today, there's a skin disease called glove-related hand urticaria, which has been a reported problem with occupational healthcare workers by repeatedly wearing and removing gloves, and that moisture and also the reaction
Mm.
caused with the latex in the glove. So that's a modern version of that.
It's hives.
What's from hives?
Urticaria is hives. That's just the scientific name for hives.
Oh.
The more you know.
But urticaria, otherwise hives, eczema is also incredibly common, not just with occupational diseases, but in general. Sunburn and skin cancer are also of concern, especially I'm sure, a lot of people, if they're working outside all day,
Mm.
got, construction workers, people picking up trash on the side of the highway. I don't know. Who else works outside? Park rangers? I don't know. I'm inside all day.
Hail, like
Uh,
things from under a log. We are.
yeah, exactly. So let's see, what do we got so far? Lung disease, skin disease. There's also overuse syndrome among persons who perform repetitive or
Mm.
forceful movements in constrictive postures. That's a very modern problem. Carpal tunnel syndrome among people who work in the poultry industry and information technology, because just like working like
Mhm.
in the hands. And then similar with that, an incredibly modern one, which is probably going to be something that we're going to look back on decades from now and be like, ooh, we should have done something about that. Computer vision syndrome among persons using information technology for
You
hours.
think these glasses are real? Perfect
My
vision, bitch.
mine, these are real.
Those
Very
are
much
real.
not perfect vision.
Among the two of us, I am the poser.
But even
Blue
still,
light, baby.
tell me that within the next 5 years, it's not going to come out that like, oh yeah, blue light glasses didn't really do anything.
Yeah, I know. I just like to pretend.
Yeah.
Makes me feel better.
Makes you feel smarter. And then also so that you can literally like push down your glasses to like read stuff. It's a prop.
Yeah,
It's a prop for you.
exactly. That's all my life is, Kevin. It's a series of vignettes on the global stage.
I'm glad that my culture, that's what my culture means for you. My
I'm
downfall.
appropriating it
Yeah,
with
appropriate.
vigor.
That's the word I was looking for. You're appropriating my culture as a glasses wearer.
It's okay. I helped you insult me.
That's fair. Another one, lead poisoning affecting workers in many industries that processed or employed lead or lead compounds. Which I feel like,
Hmm.
especially nowadays, is so often of people being like, oh, like lead paint, or like, oh, those old, whatever has like lead in it. Like it was a very
Pipes.
common thing.
Pipes are a big one.
Yeah, pipes, lead pipes, break some kneecaps. Also, infectious diseases transmitted through unsanitary working conditions such as meningitis, whooping cough, or bloodborne illnesses, just to name a few.
Yeah, you got to remember that a lot at this time, anyway, that we're talking about. A lot of just public health sanitation practices are less than 100 years old. You're
Yeah,
looking at stuff that was discovered or invented or, industrialized during wars in the 19th century. So you've got women like Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole who worked in war zones and who looked around and said, hey, maybe the health conditions are contributing to the death of all these soldiers. What can we do about it?
yeah.
So a lot of this is kind of new.
And I'm sure even like I said, that years from now, we're going to look back on even the working conditions that we currently have in a lot of places and be like, oh, we should have implemented like whatever new thing sooner. But we're always learning. It's always a learning process. And a lot of the examples that we're now going to talk about um, did have impacts in a lot of these laws and new practices that, thank goodness, are in place today, with your
Yeah.
watches and your hats and your
In
minds.
case you were wondering, OSHA was established in 1922.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense with the timeline of everything that we're talking about.
Yep.
So the first example that we're going to talk about is arguably one of the most famous examples of this kind of workplace occupational diseases, workplace horrors.
Especially if you're a Joey King fan.
Yeah, well, especially in pop culture, which I'm not even going to list off all the pop culture stuff, but on its Wikipedia, it's got like a whole section of all pop cultures. I
Mhm.
had first heard about it because I had heard of the play.
Oh
But
yeah.
which I think came out in 2000, which
Forgot
was
about that play.
Radium Girls, is what we're talking about. The Radium Girls were female factory workers who contracted radiation poisoning from painting watch dials with subluminous paint. The incidents occurred at 3 different factories in the United States, one in Orange, New Jersey, beginning around 1917, one in Ottawa, Illinois, beginning in the early 1920s, and a third facility in Waterbury, Connecticut, also in the 1920s. Glad Connecticut can represent. Love that for
There you
us.
go.
So radium had just been discovered 20 years prior to when all these were happening, which exactly what you're saying. Not only are a lot of these workplace laws and such incredibly new, if not even quite implemented at all, but we're still, finding new materials and things. And so they're like, ooh, this material that glows in the dark, that would be sick on a watch.
Remember, these are the same people who looked at arsenic and said, what a lovely shade of green. Let's put it in everything.
Yes, exactly. So all very new stuff that we, didn't know the repercussions of.
These are also people who had actual cocaine in their Coca-Cola. We've learned a lot.
Also that we have learned a lot in the last 100 years.
And used mercury and lead to color candy, like hard candy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we've evolved intellectually.
Love the periodic
nature
table,
of discovery.
Yes. Exactly. So radium had been discovered by French physicist Marie Curie.
French Polish. I'm going to correct you on that one.
French Polish, sure. Well, they're not around, so they're not going to
Yeah, but
they're not going to come after us.
I do know that Polish people are very proud of her.
Okay, very right. Incredibly fair. Marie Curie and Pierre Curie. And its properties, like we said, were not well known. Because it had been used successfully in the treatment of cancer, many considered radium a miracle element, and a variety of commercial products were manufactured in which radium was an ingredient, including toothpaste and cosmetics, along with, similar types of things that you just listed.
Fun little fact, Marie Curie's coffin is lead-lined because her remains are still radioactive.
That's actually sick as hell.
Isn't that kind of metal?
Yeah, that is hardcore as fuck.
I know. That's why she died. She's still radioactive. What is the half-life of uranium? Let's find out. So there are a couple different isotopes of uranium, and the longest half-life, do you know what a half-life is?
Is that how long it lasts or how long it's dangerous for?
A half-life is how long it takes for half the mass of the element to decay.
Gotcha.
So if you have 10 grams and the half-life is 10 years, in 10 years, 5 grams will remain. And then in another 10 years, 2.5 grams will remain. So the half-life of uranium-238 is 4.5 billion with a B years. Uranium-235 is 700 million, and 234 is 250,000 years. So she's going to be glowing for a good long while.
Yeah, that's very hard to wrap your head around. But also,
for retrospect, the human race is 250,000 years old. Homo sapiens are 250,000 years old.
It's gonna be a while.
It's gonna be a hot minute.
It's gonna be a little while. But I can understand why they thought radium was cool.
Yeah,
because it glows in the dark. The women were hired to paint dials, and they came to be known as ghost girls because the radium dust to which they were exposed to daily made their clothes, hair, and skin literally glow.
Yeah.
Which, I get why they were like, ooh, this is cool and funky. Many of the women wore their best dresses on the job so the fabric would shine brilliantly when they were dancing after work. Some even applied the paint to their teeth because it gave them radiant smiles.
Oh no, honey.
Which again, I get it.
I get it, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's easier. Hindsight's 2020. It's easier looking back and being like, oh no. But you're telling me if there wasn't a product today that was it will make your teeth smile?
Well,
there are products like that.
I don't remember. I don't know when this product went out of the circuit, but for a very long time, you could get in the 19th century eye drops laced with belladonna because they gave your eyes this glassy, sparkling, dewy effect. All in the name of vanity, I suppose. You can actually own uranium products safely. Have you ever heard of uranium glass? It's called Vaseline.
Oh, I think I have.
It glows green under UV light. I think it's
Oh,
2% uranium by weight. So it's safe for display. I don't know if you should eat out of it. I'd have to look that up. But you can
probably.
also get, do you know what Fiesta ware is?
I
You
don't even know.
absolutely do. You've seen it before. Google it. It's brightly colored ceramic.
We'll toss a
Uh,
picture up. Check us out on YouTube. Oh, just like the brightly colored bowls and plates and stuff.
yeah, they're usually in, sunset orange, kind of a periwinkle blue. You've seen these before. They're very common, except the paint that they used is radioactive, like mildly radioactive. You can hold a Geiger counter up to Fiesta ware and get a reading off of it. The glazes had,
A little bit of radioactive material in them.
yeah, they're safe.
Wow. Do you remember? This might be a
I think
this
they're
might be a
safe.
deep cut. For one of the Shrek movies, I think it was Shrek 3 and potentially Shrek 4,
Oh, wow.
McDonald's sold cups that the paint, they ended up having to recall these glass cups because the paint on the outside, which was like, painting the characters, had lead in it.
Mhm.
And
I did not
so
know that.
obviously adults are not going to be like licking the paint on the outside of a glass, but these are Shrek glasses from McDonald's.
Right.
So you get your fair share of kids licking all over the glass.
I wonder if they could have contaminated other glassware if you put them in the dishwasher.
Probably.
I don't know though.
And I am proud to say that in my pantry right now, in my parents' pantry, it's not my pantry,
Um,
on the top shelf, there are pristine Shrek glasses because my parents had gotten them, but then found out about it. And then I just don't think they ever returned it.
I wonder
And
how much
they're
money.
not used, but they're
I
like
want to know
wrapped
how
up.
much money you could get for those.
Probably. I mean, you could use it
Hang
like
on to
that.
them for another 20 years and then let me know.
Yeah, they could just be like display cups. It's in the same way that they've got like the plates that has like the queen's face on it.
Oh,
So
yeah, from your
yeah,
coronations and jubilees and stuff.
you
So
got
in
like
20
the
years, in
queen's
your mid
face.
40s,
Yeah.
I will come back to haunt you. Hey, remember me? Quick question. How are the Shrek glasses doing? What do they go for these days?
Yeah. And you'll look up at people's china cabinets and it'll be like a plate with the queen's face and then a cup with like Shrek and then a cup with like Puss in Boots and then like Fiona and Donkey and all of them. So
Whole gang.
that's just a sidetrack about lead
Radium and
paint
uranium
and
lead
radiology.
paint.
Um,
Radiology.
I don't know. I'm just saying words at this point.
Radiologists are the doctors that look at your CAT scans.
So these ghost girls, the Radium Girls, after being told that the paint was harmless, the women in each facility ingested deadly amounts of radium after being instructed to, quote, point
Mm-hmm.
their brushes on their lips in order to give them a fine tip. That's like when you like get like a piece of hair. I don't have long hair, so I can't do it, but like, like getting the fine tip.
Yeah.
The women were instructed to point their brushes in this way because using rags or a water rinse caused them to use more time and material, as the paint was made from powdered radium, gum arabic, and water. So, they were like, oh, it's not poisonous. Let's quicken up the process. Just
Yeah.
get
I
that
think
fine
because
point.
I think they were paid for however many watch faces they completed a day. So anything to speed up the process.
True.
Also, by the way, gum arabic is a binder. It's what allows the radium powder to bind with the solution of water.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Use it in paint. Totally harmless.
Yeah. But it's not totally harmless.
Radium.
Powdered radium. And then they're like,
Radium.
they're doing that. And then they're like, he's sitting there, maybe putting some on their nails, putting it on their teeth a little bit. Not a great situation. But a slightly better end to the story than the alternative. 5 of the women in New Jersey challenged their employer in a case over the right of individual workers who contract occupational diseases to sue their employer under New Jersey's occupational injuries law, which at the time had a 2-year statute of limitations, but settled out of court in 1928. 5 women in Illinois who were employees of the Radium Dial Company, which was unaffiliated with the United States Radium Corporation, sued their employer under Illinois law, winning damages in 1938. Their case was among the first in which a company was held responsible for the health and safety of its employees, and it led to a variety of reforms as well as to the creation of the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
OSHA. But 30 died from their exposure by 1927.
Okay, well, I didn't say they all lived. I said
But that
that
was
it
the end
just
of the paragraph.
I said it just was like it could have been worse. There could have been no OSHA, but at
You
least now
can
they have OSHA.
you can visit their graves in Orange, New Jersey.
I wonder if they have lead-lined caskets as well. Probably not, because they probably didn't care about them or were exposed to as much
Over
mercury.
dentists were among the first to see numerous problems among the dial painters. That would make sense if they're licking their brushes. Their primary exposure is that
True.
you can
Even if
get
they're
dental
not,
pain.
yeah, even if they're not directly painting it on their teeth, if
Oh yeah, you're licking it
everybody's
off your
licking their
brush.
brushes, yeah,
Absolutely overextended multiple, several hundred times a day.
yeah,
Um, however many days a week. Dental pain, loose teeth, lesions, ulcers, and the failure of tooth extractions to heal were common. They developed anemia, bone fractures, necrosis of the jaw. That's horrible. Like their entire jawbone would decompose in their mouth.
oh.
It's called radium jaw, that condition. Radiation exposure also causes suppression of like menstruation and causes sterility.
Yeah. There's a lot of bad side effects to radiation, which is why most places they try to avoid that. They try to avoid those bad side effects. But you can even see just from, and that was very much summarizing the whole story. But that's why it's become bigger in pop culture with there's a movie, I think a few movies. And there's the play, I think was written in 2000, I want to say. Actually.
There are obviously a ton of cover-ups when these medical conditions came to light and they were being directly linked to the work in these factories.
Yeah.
Like some of the doctors and dentists and researchers were received requests from companies not to release their data on this stuff.
Interesting. I can understand from their point of view why they're trying to hide it.
In 1923, the first dial painter died, and before her death, her jaw fell away from her skull.
Oh, that must have been a sight to see.
Oh.
Yeesh. That's what I gotta say.
At the urging of the company's worker deaths, because by 1924, 50 women were ill and a dozen had died. These deaths were attributed by medical professionals to other causes like syphilis.
Oh,
And
no,
it was
good. Blame it on something else.
Right, specifically the sexual promiscuity of women. She's a witch. It all circles back.
It all circles back.
Yep. Oh, all right, but little comeuppance. The inventor of radium dial paint, Dr. Sabin Arnold von Sochsky, I'm sorry, died in November of 1928, becoming the 16th known victim of poison by radium dial paint. He'd gotten sick from radium in his hands.
Makes sense. I'm sure he had his fair share of exposure.
Yeah. Apparently his death helped them win their court cases.
That's
gnarly.
Yeah. A lot of not great stuff. But yeah, like I said, there's a lot of books written, short stories, made for TV movies. More recently, there's a movie that I think was released, but it was like during the pandemic, Radium Girls. That was probably the most famous example. Actually, this next example, arguably pretty close because Radium Girls didn't become a phrase. You ever hear the phrase Mad Hatters?
No, Gavin, I've been living under a rock for the past 24 years of my life.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy that I'm about to explain this phrase to you, of which you told me, hey, let's talk about this phrase. Crazy.
It's crazy how that happens pretty much every single episode.
That's how it works. So the idea of mad as a hatter, it's not 100% confirmed that this is the case. But this is one theory of it. So in the 18th and 19th century England, mercury, new element alert, new element drop, guys. We got radium. How many elements are we mentioning in this episode? Comment down below. How many elements we mentioned? Check them off.
Test at the end.
Check them off on your periodic table like a bingo board. Mercury was used in the production of felt, which was commonly used in the hat making trade at the time. Long-term use of mercury products often resulted in mercury poisoning, induced erethism among hat makers.
Also known as erythemismus mercurialis, Mad Hatter disease or Mad Hatter syndrome is a neurological disorder which affects the whole central nervous system, as well as a symptom complex derived from mercury poisoning. Not to spoil it.
Checks out. In the late 19th century United States, a notable example occurred in Danbury, Connecticut, 2 for 2. Connecticut is 2 for 2, guys.
Shit be going down in Connecticut.
The
What's y'all's
one
motto?
time there's representation of Connecticut.
Shut
Radium
up, I live in the
Girls,
Midwest.
Mad Hatters. Apparently, 19th century Danbury, Connecticut, major player in the hat making game.
Do you know
As
what hat
any,
makers are called?
what are they called?
Milliners.
Oh, new word.
You know, educated.
Gosh, how could I fit that into daily conversation? I don't know.
I find a way, but maybe that's an occupational hazard.
How can
so to
I
speak.
find a way to fit that in without it just being a fun fact? Like being like, oh, what milliner made that hat?
Work in costuming.
Dude, where do you get your hat stock? I gotta find a new milliner.
You mock, sir.
No, I'm serious. Instances of erythism were so widespread among hat makers, the condition became locally known as the Danbury Shakes. It was characterized by slurred speech, tremors, stumbling, and in extreme cases, hallucination.
That just sounds like a dance, the Danbury Shake.
It does. It sounds like it could be right up there with like those like
The
dances you do at
Atlantic
like
City
weddings.
wiggle.
Yeah. It's like,
Like
all
the
right.
Cupid shuffle.
Yeah, exactly. Like, all
Everyone
right.
on the floor, it's time for the Danbury Shake.
Yeah, we just did Cat and I Joe. Next up, the Danbury Shakes. That was where it originated from. And then now we look at the phrase mad as a hatter. Mad as a hatter is a colloquial English phrase used in conversation to suggest lightheartedly that a person is suffering from insanity. The etymology of the phrase is uncertain, with explanations both connected and unconnected to the trade of hat making.
Interesting.
Potentially. And based on, hat makers going like basically crazy from the mercury, it tracks. The earliest known appearance of the phrase in print is in an 1829 issue of Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine, predating the Hatter from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by several decades.
He was making up a lot of shit. He could have pulled that from something, cut himself some slack.
I guess I never thought about where it came from, but I guess I didn't assume that he made it up.
Yeah. Did you know that there was a ton of other, mercury poisoning and Mad Hatters in Orange, New Jersey? Again, where did we hear about Orange, New Jersey?
Interesting. We heard about that in the Radium Girls. What's going on in Orange, New Jersey? Orange, New Jersey, and
Suspicious
Connecticut
stuff,
as a
my man.
state. Very suspicious.
In
Very suspicious
1878,
places.
there was an inspection of 25 firms around Newark conducted by a doctor, and it revealed mercurial disease. Mercurial does not mean this, but whatever. In 25% of 1,589 hatters. That's a stupid number of people. That's a stupid proportion.
A lot of
And he figured it was probably an underestimate because workers, didn't want to report symptoms for fear of being fired.
Yeah. It seems like a theme.
And guess what they blamed a lot of the health problems on this time?
Wait, last time it was chlamydia. This time
Syphilis.
Or wait, was it syphilis last time or this one's syphilis?
It was syphilis last time.
It was syphilis last time? Gotta be some other STD, like gonorrhea or something.
No. It's excessive alcohol use. Thus using the stigma of drunkenness in mainly immigrant workforce to justify the unsanitary working conditions provided by employers. Aren't white people fun?
You know what's the thing that threw me? I forgot that they only blame STDs when it's a woman and alcoholism when it's a man. So you know what? That really threw me.
Yeah. God. Speaking through your bias again, Gavin.
I know. No, if anything, I'm too woke. I didn't think about how that's what the people see them as. It all comes back to burning witches. That's what every episode comes back to.
And deodorant scents.
Yes. Exactly.
In 1901, a survey of 11 employers in the hatting industry of over 1,000 hatters in Newark and Orange found a lack of awareness of any disease peculiar to hatters apart from tuberculosis and rheumatism. They're like, what? they're just twitchy.
Not us, not around here. These guys just like to have fun. Just like
Right?
to
They're
keep it
just
light and breezy.
practicing. Oh
They sh-
yeah, there's a dance down at the hall this afternoon. They're just practicing. They're all
and-
from Canada now.
They're all just chilling at the workplace. They're like, we like to keep it breezy here. We like to keep it light, keep it loose.
We're like a family.
Oh, that's how that you want to know killer workplace when they say we're a family. That is a killer workplace.
Massive bullring red flag.
Oh yeah. So at the very beginning of this episode, we talked a little bit about boys working at miners, miner, a young person, miner, coal miner. And you know how much the coal industry is coming back. You know who's waiting on the coal industry to come back? The state of West Virginia. Someone's got to tell them it's not coming back. The next thing we're going to be talking about is what is known as a breaker boy, which also sounds like a boy band, Breaker Boys.
It does. That's another good one.
I mean, I feel like you put any thing in front of, like the Radium Girls, the Breaker Boys, the Mad Hatters.
Pretty much. Like there's a whole collection of, 19th century gothic horror, punk grunge in there somewhere.
Yeah. Makes me wish that I could play any instrument just to start, even if the band sucks, just have a band. Call them the Breaker Boys. Oh, you're in a band? Oh, I am in a band. Oh, what band? Oh, the Breaker Boys. We're just Breaker Boys. We're just breaking it down. You know how it be. And that's exactly what these guys did. They broke down coal. A breaker boy was a coal mining worker whose job was to separate the impurities from coal by hand in a coal breaker.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, that's obviously great. So who do we have breaking up these coals? Children and old people, obviously. Although breaker boys were primarily children, elderly coal miners who could no longer work in the mines because of age, disease, or accident were also sometimes employed as breaker boys. Because it's like, we got to still make use of them somehow. Just stick them up in the high chair, have them getting their hands in all the gears and stuff.
With the little tray in front of them.
Yeah.
Everything's got suction cups on the bottom.
Oh my goodness.
It's dark.
The use of breaker boys began in the mid 1860s, although public disapproval. Why would there be public disapproval? I could not guess.
It is surprising.
Of the employment of children as breaker boys existed by the mid 1880s. The practice did not end until the early 1920s.
Sure.
Yes. It seems,
I'm gonna guess.
Yeah, I would assume. The removal of impurities in coal was done by hand, usually by breaker boys between the ages of 8 and 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Little baby boys.
Mm-hmm.
The use of breaker boys, as I said, began around 1866. For 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, breaker boys would sit on wooden seats perched over the chutes and conveyor belts, picking slate and other impurities out of coal. Breaker boys working on top of chutes or conveyor belts would stop the coal by pushing their boots into the stream of fuel flowing beneath them, briefly picking out impurities and then letting the coal pass on to the next breaker boy for further processing. I mean, that's a good idea, though. I get it.
Assembly line.
It is. Get a machine to do that. Now, I understand.
In just 40 years, machine.
Others would divert coal into a horizontal chute at which they sat and then picked the coal clean by allowing the fuel to flow into, quote, clean coal bins. You know those coal bins, the clean coal bins.
Squeaky clean, could lick the floor.
You know the clean energy of coal. The work performed by breaker boys was hazardous. Duh. Breaker boys were forced to work.
You read that with such confidence, too.
Breaker boys were forced to work without gloves so that they could handle the slick coal. The slate, however, was sharp, and the breaker boys would often leave work with their fingers cut and bleeding. So that also goes back to
straight in the bloodstream. Super good idea.
Bloodborne illnesses, like we were talking about earlier, where, if they've got all these open wounds on their hands, that's just another thing. I'm sure for as much as they want this coal to be clean, it's probably not clean enough to be swimming around with your blood. Could not imagine.
Even with the heavy quotation marks around clean, there's just nothing. No saving grace there.
No. The breaker boys sometimes also had their fingers amputated by rapidly moving conveyor belts Others lost feet, hands, arms, and legs. These are 8 and 12-year-old boys.
No.
Boys.
Children.
They lost
The
that as they
youths.
moved among the machinery and became caught under the conveyor belts or in gears. Many were
my God.
crushed to death.
Factory work was so dangerous for, forever. I
Yeah.
mean, the whole Rosie the Riveter image with her hair up like that.
Mhm.
That's not a fashion statement. That's because part of the advertisement, like part of the work safety for women working in factories during World War II when the men were all fighting was to keep their hair up out of the way because it could get caught in the gears and the machinery and do horrible things to you.
I can imagine.
So
I can imagine.
Even after the advent of OSHA, factory work did not get safer in every regard.
No. But I mean, at least it was get a little safer than this. Many of them were crushed to death, their bodies retrieved from the gears of the machinery by supervisors only at the end of the working day.
Ah!
Others were caught in the rush of coal and crushed to death or smothered. Dry coal would kick up so much dust that breaker boys sometimes wore lamps on their heads to see, and asthma and black lung disease were common. Coal was often washed to remove impurities, which created sulfuric acid. The acid burned the hands of the breaker boys.
Oh my God. How is this the worst one we've talked about?
I feel like this checks off almost every single box of all the ones we talked, like all the types that we talked about in the beginning. Skin disease
You've
of
got respiratory diseases.
the lung diseases.
Skin disease.
Death of being crushed, the general danger.
You're totally jumped the line of escalation here.
That's fair. That was a big jump. That was a big jump. What else?
I mean, we had all the limb amputations to go through.
True. You get their fingers, their legs climbing up. Imagine like a little kid climbing over like the gears and stuff.
No, I won't. Thank you.
Yeah, actually don't believe that. I
wonder how if their eyes were affected too, if you're exposed to all that coal dust. And what kind of acid was it? Something
sulfuric acid.
Was it sulfuric acid?
Yeah, I mean probably multiple kinds.
Chemical reaction there.
Yeah.
Hold on.
It must have hurt their eyes.
Oh, our experiments suggest that when coal ash interacts with water, as it will if it is spread on soil or buried in soil without protective liners, there is extensive mobilization of arsenic, selenium, and chromium in the form of highly toxic hexavalent chromium. That's super bad, in case you were wondering.
That's not good.
It's very unstable. So, this has been Science Corner, long and convoluted as it was. Don't mix coal, ash, and water.
Yeah. And that's what all these little boys were doing every day at work. They're like, hey, Mom, got to go into the office, got to go wash some coal. Terrible.
To work.
Terrible. Finally, we're going to be talking about just one more example. Also a pretty disgusting one. This one doesn't even have a fun name.
It is if you have a musical theater background.
Why? What's the fun name?
Bob Fosse.
Completely different thing. This isn't even spelled the same. This is
know.
Phossy Jaw.
I can't know that.
Technically, it does have a fun name. The Matchstick Girls. They were a part of this.
So I'm sorry, we've got the Radium Girls, the Breaker Boys, the Mad Hatters, and the Matchstick Girls.
Those are like incredible British band, rock and roll band names.
British punk.
Yeah.
Which is the original punk.
So good. So good. Not all the real stuff that happened. Not good.
So good, but super bad.
But whoever was naming these was dropping banger.
PR department deserves a raise.
Literally. PR killing this. But it was also killing a lot of people. And it was serious.
So Phossy Jaw.
Phossy Jaw, formerly known as phosphorus necrosis of the jaw, was an occupational disease affecting those who worked with white phosphorus, also known as yellow phosphorus, without proper safeguards. It was most commonly seen in workers in the matchstick industry in the 19th and early 20th centuries. It was caused by white phosphorus vapor, which destroys the bones of the jaw. Modern occupational hygiene practices have since eliminated the working conditions that have caused this disease.
Ooh, phosphorus, not a good one.
Yeah. I don't even think I'm going to show a picture of what this looks like on the YouTube one because it is like...
Oh, now I gotta look.
It's disgusting. So we're not going to talk about it for too long because I don't want to put the picture in. Basically, it's just like someone's a big, it's almost like they had an allergic reaction on the bottom half of their face, like this bubbled up big jaw.
Oh,
Disgusting.
yeah. There aren't actually that many photos.
No, they're not. So I guess I could put it in because they're pretty old black and white photos.
Oh, yeah.
I don't, that's pretty, I feel like I would have
It's
to be,
just if you really want to have the flavor, you can look up necrosis of the jaw. I don't recommend it, but you could.
yeah. So white phosphorus was the active ingredient of most matches in the 1840s to 1910s. It was used for like the part that lit on fire. I don't know what part of the match that's called.
The
But
head of the match,
sure, the head of the match. I'm pretty sure
the colorful bit.
they took wooden sticks and then dipped it on both sides with the mixture and then like cut it in half, which kind of seems redundant, but understandable. I think it was also on like an assembly line. But so, obviously when they started seeing the Phossy Jaw on a lot of these workers, some concerns came up, which ultimately contributed to the London Match Girls strike of 1888, which I believe was their first album. Although this strike did not
Strike of
end
88.
the use of white phosphorus, William Booth and the Salvation Army opened up a matchmaking factory in 1891, which used the much safer, though more expensive, red phosphorus.
Well,
Ooh.
the Salvation Army was keeping on theme, I guess.
Yeah. However, it was not until the use of white phosphorus was prohibited by the International Burn Convention in 1906, and the provisions were implemented in national laws over the next few years that the industrial use ceased.
Yikes, dude.
So, to recap, Radium Girls. They painted a little glow in the dark radium on the watch dials. Mad Hatters. There was the mercury, right? Yeah, mercury in the felt that they used to make hats. Breaker Boys were, breaking up the coal, and aside from just that in general, was also creating acid by washing the coal. They would breathe and it would get on their hands. And finally, Phossy Jaw, from working with white phosphorus without proper safeguards, mostly in the matchstick industry. So that's the too long didn't read version. Wow. Those are some pretty nutty occupational diseases, if I had to say so.
Yeah. Yeah. Good thing we don't have any of those anymore. And good thing even if we did, they'd be covered by universal health insurance. Oh, wait. We live in the United States. There are still lawsuits being filed for first responders from when the Twin Towers came down. Regarding the occupational diseases they picked up.
Yeah,
while
and
sifting through rubble. Jon Stewart testified to Congress on their behalf.
Yeah, and how they're not being protected or given the right health care because of what they like. Oh my gosh.
Like all the debris they inhaled and all the injuries they experienced on site.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
So based upon what we talked about, obviously, as we said in the beginning, era of industrialization, late 1800s, early 1900s, obviously examples even farther, more modern examples. Obviously, hindsight is 2023, some could say. I don't know how glasses.
But we
won't. So we touched upon a few of them in the beginning, but I think an interesting way to end the episode. What do you think 100 years from now? We probably won't be looking back on, but people, maybe we'll still be around in 100 years. Who knows where technology will be? I'm sure even like 60 years or so. But 100 or so years from now, what do you think people are going to look back on this time period? And it will be obviously not the equivalent because we're not working with uranium when we're all working from home. But what do you think are going to be some big things that people are going to look back on and like reflect in a similar kind of way?
Well, you already talked about the negative consequences of staring at a screen all day, and we're already seeing the results of being hunched over a computer for all day. But I think actually a lot of it's going to come from mental health. I think as mental health starts to become more respected as a field of medicine and actual medical health, I think the occupational impact on people's psychological well-being is going to start to become better documented.
Yeah. And actually, that last point, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it's so hard to look on mental health of the past, is because so much of it was
Mm,
undocumented. So now that
mm,
we live in a height of really just documentation of everything all the time of all sorts, um, so especially with mental health, and also, going through a pandemic and how everyone in society has reacted to that. Also, yeah, looking at computer screens, especially exponentially more, also with the pandemic.
yeah.
Uh, Actually, what? Speaking of the pandemic, I'm sure people are going to look back on how society reacted to the pandemic and be like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe we didn't take that as seriously as what we should. Like, should have taken it more seriously," and things like that. I also think not necessarily as much with work, because not as much with workers, but obviously like looking at your phones, and in the same way that people are like looking at computer screens, also like everyone's like this, it's like your neck is
Yeah.
like this, looking at your phone all the time. I'm sure like neck and back pain from looking at screens is
I
gonna be
think there
insane.
will be occupational hazards and diseases coming from as we invest in and search for alternative forms of energy, just because it's going to be the
Oh,
unknown frontier.
true.
Um, oh, have you ever seen that photo? I think it won a Pulitzer of the two workers on top of one of those giant windmills. If you're not from the US,
Yeah,
dotted, or North America, you get these massive white windmills for wind energy, but there's this heartbreaking photo. One of them's on fire and there's two workers trapped at the top of it.
yeah,
Um, but I think in the way, 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 way distant future, you gotta wonder how many occupational diseases are gonna come from space travel.
true.
Just like, cannot you gotta wonder if rocket fuel is a carcinogenic.
True. And I completely agree with what you're saying about like all these different future energy sources that, 100 years ago, people were like, "Oh, look at this shiny thing that can make my
Right.
watch glow in the dark. This can't be hurtful." And we're coming up with new energy sources today. And yeah, sure, some of it's, wind and
Yeah.
solar, which is pretty known, but I'm sure if people are mixing together different chemicals and trying to create their own versions of fossil fuels, like man-made fossil fuels, there's no
We
way that's
do,
not going to
yeah.
lead to some crazy shit.
I mean, we see a lot of examples in consumerism of those things, all the food fads or just the consumable fads like vaping, which was
True.
supposed to be better than smoking and has its own litany of health concerns that are now just being better understood and researched.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
cigarettes in general.
Now this
Oh,
is getting depressing, because now I'm like thinking about, think about fast food, you think about the implications of fast
yeah.
fashion and those working conditions.
Oof.
This is
Oof.
just, gosh, I mean, it was a downer episode to begin with,
They're
but
all downers.
now to reflect on this, especially.
I didn't think about the sweatshop industry, the fast fashion industry. That's a really good
Yeah.
one, so to speak.
Before we get too downhill, here's the note that we will end on. Out of the 4 band names that we got, which band would you be in, or would you be a fan of? Radium Girls, Breaker Boys, Mad Hatters, or Matchstick Girls?
I dig the Breaker Boys.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I do dig it. I feel like a bit of a traitor, but I think Breaker Boys, I see them as like the Beastie Boys, like some 90s early
Yeah,
hip hop rap
oh,
situation.
or it could even be a more moderny boy band, but also like a new take on like old like British punk rock and roll, like what you were saying.
That'd be awesome. That'd be pretty awesome. I can see that
Yeah,
with the Mad Hatters too. Even
yeah,
though, yeah, even though interestingly, a lot of the data comes from US facilities.
yeah,
It's fine.
yeah. I would lean towards Mad Hatters as a dope name. Matchstick Girls, I lean away from, because there's already some band that has Matchstick in it, or like Matchbook or something. So that's not
Uh,
as original.
I will believe you.
Like Matchbook.
Radium Girls would be awesome if everyone didn't know what it
Yeah, if it wasn't then
was.
as famous, which, you know what? It's a
Yeah.
good thing that it's famous, but also imagine like a 90s girl group like the Radium Girls.
I'm thinking it would be more like I see the Radium Girls as being sort of like Paramore or even
Oh, actually,
Heart.
you know what? That was what I was thinking. Or
Uh-huh.
like what's the group that like Phoebe Bridgers is in, Boy Genius? Like just
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
female like the biggest stars. like the biggest names,
Right.
make a super
Or
group.
okay, I'm super into heart right now. Barracuda,
Yeah.
something like that. Just something
Yeah, I can see that.
crunchy and angry.
If the next, we haven't seen a big super group in a while of like a bunch of already super famous musicians coming together to like
In this country,
make
anyway.
an album or something. No, but like recently, like in the past, like in our lifetime, I would say, like in the 80s and maybe 90s, sure. But if there's not a super group with like every big female artist called Radium Girls, I'm gonna be pissed.
I
That's what
agree.
that's what they gotta be. So what did we learn from this episode? What's the lesson?
Yeah, what's the moral?
Don't inhale periodic tables. Elements. Well,
says a man who never set foot in a science lab in the entirety of his educational career.
Periodic table. It was been sitting on my because it's been there since I was like in middle school, and now I just tore it down. So
end of an era.
Yes.
I think the moral of the story is that you can never count on corporate employers to care about the needs of their laborers so long as the cost of labor is outweighed by their profit.
I mean, yeah, that's like the real one. I would say the other one is don't eat radium. Don't eat poisonous materials. Even if they're like this, so safe. Guys, these are so safe. Just eat it.
Don't put the crayon in your mouth.
Yeah, you never know.
You had better luck with that. All the Marines out there just shoulders slump.
Oh my gosh. What a world we live in. That's that. Bye.
That's all, folks.
This podcast is produced and engineered by Gavin Berger with High Tops Media. The Dark Archive is co-hosted by Gavin Berger, Julia Siegel, Chris Massarelli, and Shaila Jayasinghe. Our theme music is composed by Jeffrey Taylor. You can rate and review The Dark Archive on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and check out more episodes of The Dark Archive available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Dark Archive Podcast and on TikTok at The Dark Archive. And see more of our content with High Tops Media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at High Tops Media.